The crystal chandelier above the Charleston Gala didn't sparkle. It hummed with the sound of old money and older secrets. My mother-in-law, Sarah, stood at the head of the mahogany table, her silk dress rustling like a warning. She raised her glass, the wine shimmering under the light as she looked past me, past my husband, and settled her gaze on the biological cousins. "To the legacy," she announced, her voice honey-wrapped in iron. "To the true bloodline that keeps this family estate breathing." One by one, she handed out small, heavy boxes, $1,200 designer watches for Hannah and Ryan. Then, she turned to my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. My heart didn't beat. It calculated. Sarah reached under the table and pulled out a plastic bag. She handed Emma a thrift store teddy bear with a torn ear and a faded ribbon. "And a little something for our guest," Sarah whispered. Behind her, the projector hummed to life, displaying the ancestral family tree. I looked at the branch where Emma's name should have been. It was blank, a smooth, white void where my daughter had been surgically removed from the history of the house. Have you ever been treated like a guest in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from tonight. I'm reading every story. I didn't blink. I didn't pull Emma away or try to shield her eyes. I wanted her to see. I wanted her to witness exactly who these people were before I removed them from her life forever. Sarah was still smiling, that thin, venomous line of a mouth curled in triumph as the other guests whispered. She thought she had won. She thought a $10 bear was a finishing move. It wasn't. It was an opening bell. Anger didn't cloud my vision. It sharpened it into a lens. In the world of museum curation, when a piece is revealed to be a fake, you don't get emotional. You remove it from the gallery. I stood up, my heels clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. I walked directly to the gift table where the 2 trust fund envelopes sat $2,500 each, earmarked for the true heirs. I picked them up. Sarah's smile faltered. "Jennifer, what are you?" I didn't answer. I turned and walked toward the 3-tiered industrial chocolate fountain. With the steady hand of someone who handles ancient artifacts, I held the envelopes over the dark, cascading liquid. Then, I let go. The white paper hit the chocolate, sinking instantly into the thick, warm sludge. Silence didn't just fall. It crashed into the room. "Since Emma is a guest," I said, my voice clinical and projecting to the back of the hall. "Then my husband's salary, the one that paid for the catering, the venue, and the very chocolate those envelopes are drowning in, is guest money too. And I'm reclaiming the interest." Beside me, Christopher didn't hesitate. He didn't defend his mother. He reached into his tuxedo pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped a sequence he'd clearly prepared. "I just revoked the family authorization for the Charleston estate accounts, Mother," he said, his tone as flat as a legal brief. "The staff, the security, and the utilities for your legacy home are now offline. Since we aren't family, I'm sure your true bloodline can figure out how to pay the bills by morning." We didn't wait for her to scream. I took Emma's hand, leaving the thrift store bare face down on the white linen tablecloth. We walked out of the gala, the sound of my heels, the only noise in a room full of people who had just realized they were now standing in a building they could no longer afford. I didn't look back as we crossed the threshold of the estate, leaving the suffocating scent of lilies and expensive perfume behind. The humid Charleston air hit my face, but I felt a different kind of chill, the clinical clarity that comes when you finally stop trying to fix a broken machine and decide to scrap it for parts instead. For 6 years, I had been the silent architect of Sarah's social survival. While she played the role of the grand matriarch, I was the one behind the scenes. I curated her private art collection to ensure its value outpaced inflation. I managed the estate's historical tax filings. I even used a significant portion of my own inheritance to restore the East Wing after a burst pipe threatened to ruin the family's legacy foundations. I had been the ultimate silent investor in a business called Family, and I had just realized I was holding 100% of the debt with 0% of the equity. I looked down at Emma's hand in mine. She was quiet, too quiet for a 7-year-old. She hadn't asked why her cousins got watches while she got a piece of trash. She didn't ask why her name wasn't on the big screen. Children are the most accurate barometers of family toxicity. We think we are protecting them by staying quiet, but we are actually teaching them to accept mistreatment as a standard for love. I had fallen into the trap of normalization. I told myself that if I just worked harder, if I made the holidays more perfect, if I ignored the subtle barbs about Emma's non-biological status, eventually the gap would close. I thought love was a bridge I could build alone. But you can't build a bridge to a cliff that keeps receding. Sarah didn't see a grandchild when she looked at Emma. She saw a line item she wanted to delete. She saw a guest who was eating into the inheritance of her real bloodline. As we reached the car, Christopher opened the door for Emma, his jaw set in a hard, professional line I usually only saw in the courtroom. He wasn't the grieving son anymore. He was a man looking at a breach of contract so severe it required a total liquidation of assets. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm more than okay," I said, checking my phone. The first of the family group texts were already rolling in, outraged, confused, demanding. I've spent 6 years polishing Sarah's reputation. I think it's time I let the world see the rust underneath. The morning after the gala didn't bring a hangover. It brought a strategy. Sarah's response was exactly what I expected from a woman who valued optics over blood, a scorched earth smear campaign. By 8 a.m., the family group chat was a graveyard of my reputation. Sarah had posted a long, rambling manifesto on Facebook about entitlement, mental instability, and how Christopher was being held hostage by a woman who didn't understand the sanctity of the Charleston name. I watched the notifications scroll by while I sipped my coffee. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. In my line of work, you don't argue with a counterfeit. You simply document the discrepancies until the piece is devalued to zero. "She's threatening a defamation suit," Christopher said, walking into the kitchen. He wasn't wearing a bathrobe. He was in a charcoal gray suit, his briefcase already open on the island. He looked less like a son and more like a predator who had found a weakness in the opposition's filing. "She wants the watches back, and she's demanding a public apology for the trauma we caused the cousins." "Let her threaten," I said, sliding a folder across the marble. Because while she was busy writing her Facebook status, I was looking at the provenance of the Legacy Collection jewelry she wore last night. I had spent years studying the brushstrokes of masters and the chemical composition of ancient pigments. I knew how to spot a fake. Sarah's ancestral emerald necklace, the one she claimed had been in the family since 1890, had a setting that didn't exist before 1980. "Christopher, your mother has been the face of this family's pure history," I continued, "but the history she's selling is a forgery. She hasn't just been mean, she's been erasing the truth to hide something. I want a full forensic audit of every trust account she manages, especially Emma's." This was the moment the conflict shifted. It was no longer about a thrift store bear or a toast at a party. It was about the adoption paradox. Sarah used the concept of bloodline as a weapon to exclude Emma, yet she was perfectly happy to use the resources linked to Emma's father to fund her biological favorites. To Sarah, Emma was non-family when it came to love, but she was primary family when it came to being a source of capital. It was a parasitic relationship, masquerading as a traditional value system. "I've already filed the notice of breach of fiduciary duty," Christopher said, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm not playing son anymore. I'm playing the IRS. I've initiated an audit of the Charleston estate's operating expenses for the last 10 years. If she's been skimming, I'll find the decimal point where she failed." The forensic audit didn't just open a door, it blew the hinges off the entire family vault. Christopher and I sat in his home office, the glow of 3 monitors reflecting off his glasses. On the screen was a spreadsheet that told a story much darker than a simple case of favoritism. "Jennifer, look at the entry from 3 years ago," Christopher said, his voice dropping into that terrifyingly calm register he used right before a cross-examination. "The Legacy Trust, the one Sarah claims, is funded by generations of Charleston ancestors. It's a shell." I leaned in, my curator's eye spotting the anomaly immediately. There were periodic infusions of cash, always in the amount of $40,000, appearing like clockwork every 6 months. I traced the source code of the transfers. They weren't coming from an ancestral landholding or a blue-chip stock portfolio. They were coming from a dormant account in Emma's biological father's name, a secondary life insurance trust that Christopher had been told was lost to administrative fees years ago. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sarah hadn't just been mean to Emma. She had been harvesting her. She used Emma's status as a non-relative to justify treating her like a servant, while simultaneously using Emma's actual inheritance to pay for the designer watches, the cousins' private schools, and the very champagne she had used to toast her true bloodline at the gala. It was the ultimate irony. The pure family was being kept on life support by the very child they claimed didn't belong. "She's been skimming," I whispered. "She's been stealing from a 7-year-old to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford on her own." "It's not just skimming," Christopher replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up a digitized record from a high-end auction house. "Look at the emerald necklace." I found the sale record. Sarah sold the original family heirloom 6 years ago, right after we adopted Emma. She replaced it with a lab-grown synthetic and pocketed the difference. She's been liquidating the family history to keep up appearances, and she used Emma's trust to cover the insurance premiums on the fakes. In the world of art, a forgery is a crime against history. In a family, this was a crime against the future. Sarah had spent years gaslighting us, making us feel like we were lucky to be included in her prestigious world, while she was effectively picking our daughter's pockets under the table. "Christopher," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the synthetic stones Sarah wore, "we aren't going to just sue her. We're going to dismantle her. We're going to take back every cent, every brick of that estate, and every bit of dignity she stole from Emma." "I've already drafted the criminal referral," Christopher said, hitting the print command. The printer began to hum, churning out the pages that would end Sarah's reign. This isn't family drama anymore. This is a crime scene. The brunch at the estate was supposed to be Sarah's victory lap, a chance to regroup and pressure Christopher into dropping the audit. She sat at the head of the table, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a silver teapot, the synthetic emeralds on her neck catching the morning sun. She looked smaller today, the weight of the professional shift finally pressing down on her. "Christopher, darling," she started, her voice thin. "Family matters should stay within these walls. This audit, it's embarrassing. Think of the legacy. Think of what people will say." Christopher didn't look up from his coffee. "I am thinking of the legacy, Mother. I'm thinking about how much of it was stolen." I signaled Emma. She walked forward, carrying the weathered wooden box we had found in the back of the estate's climate-controlled storage, the one Sarah thought I'd never audited. Emma placed it on the table directly in front of Sarah. "Grandma," Emma said, her voice clear and devoid of the fear Sarah had spent years trying to instill in her. "Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." Sarah's face went from pale to ashen. She opened the lid with a shaky hand. Inside wasn't a child's drawing. It was a stack of certified bank statements and the original auction house receipt for the real emeralds she had sold 6 years ago. Attached to the top was a criminal referral for felony embezzlement and wire fraud. "You used my daughter as an ATM," I said, my voice cutting through the clinking of silverware like a razor. "You erased her name from the family tree while you were busy draining her father's trust to pay for your fake life. You didn't just exclude her, you robbed her." Sarah looked at the cousins, then at Christopher. "I did it for the family name." "I had to keep the estate running." "Christopher, please. We're losing everything. Do something for your sister, for the history of this house." The woman who had treated us like guests was now a beggar in her own dining room. Christopher stood up, sliding a final folder across the table. It wasn't a settlement offer. It was a 24-hour notice to vacate. "I already did something for the family," Christopher said, his tone lethal and final. "I protected the only member of it who actually matters. This house was bought with funds stolen from Emma's trust. Legally, it belongs to her now. And as her trustee, I'm terminating your residency." "You can't do this," Sarah whispered, a single tear of desperation rolling down her cheek. "I have nowhere to go. I'm sure the true bloodline will take you in," I said, standing up and taking Emma's hand. "After all, blood is thicker than water, right? Let's see if it's thick enough to pay for a hotel." We walked out as the security team we had hired, paid for by the restored trust, began the process of changing the locks. The matriarch was gone. The curator had finished the audit. The dust didn't just settle. 3 weeks after the locks were changed on the Charleston estate, the air in our new home, a quiet, sun-drenched cottage miles away from the humidity of Sarah's expectations, felt breathable for the first time. The resolution wasn't loud. It was a series of wire transfers and signatures. We didn't just take the estate. We liquidated it. Every piece of forged jewelry, every mahogany chair, and every drop of Sarah's legacy was sold to restore Emma's trust. After the legal fees and the forensic accountants were paid, the ledger finally balanced. Emma didn't just have her father's inheritance back. She had a future that wasn't being harvested by a parasite. The final severance is rarely a single moment. It's a process of realization. I sat on the porch, watching Christopher and Emma play in the yard, and I realized that cutting a poisonous branch isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of forestry. If you don't prune the rot, the whole tree dies. Sarah had tried to use the concept of blood to keep us tethered to her dysfunction. But blood is just biology. Family is a choice made in the quiet moments, in the way Christopher looked at Emma as if she were the center of his universe, despite sharing 0% of her DNA. The final scene of our transformation didn't happen at a gala. It happened in a small, wood-paneled courtroom. There were no projectors or designer watches. It was just us and a judge. "Do you understand the significance of this petition?" the judge asked, looking over his spectacles at Emma. "Yes, sir," Emma said, her voice steady. "I'm choosing my own name." When we walked out of that building, Emma wasn't a guest in the Charleston lineage anymore. She carried my maiden name, a name that, in our house, stands for curators, protectors, and truth-tellers. That night, for the first time in 7 years, I didn't dream of family trees or missing branches. I slept in the silence of a house where everyone belonged. We celebrated a quiet Christmas by the fire, with small, thoughtful gifts and the knowledge that no one was keeping score. The ledger was closed. The audit was over. We were finally just a family. If you believe family is a choice and not a bloodline, hit share. Don't let anyone make your child feel like an outsider in their own home. Subscribe for more stories of justice.